Fran, thanks so much for being here. We're so excited to have you. I'm so excited to have you on.
Thank you.
So
Thank you, Brittany.
you're one of those that I just really got excited. Malcolm told us he was coming on, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is so.
Well, thank you so much.
So fun to
Thank
have
you.
you.
I'm excited to be here. I have known Malcolm a long time, and glad to be on. I'm a basketball junkie, as everybody knows. So to be part of the Texas Legends breakfast this morning, virtually anyway, is a thrill for me. And I am in Colorado Springs right now. We got out of that is not, we are not in Philadelphia. That background is a Zoom background, but I just figured I'd have a basketball background. And that's my favorite arena in college basketball right there, the Palestra in Philadelphia. So that's, I'm not coming to you guys from there.
Well, too bad. That would have been kind of perfect. You're just broadcasting straight from the arena. Well, we'll start off a little bit with your background. So you were born in Brooklyn, the oldest of 7 children. Tell us a little bit about your upbringing and how being the oldest with 6 brothers and sisters kind of impacted you as a person and as a coach.
Yeah, thank you very much. For those of you who don't know, I've made my home in Dallas the last 18 years. My wife is a University Park girl, Highland Park grad, and I took her around the country on this coaching odyssey, and then we've settled in Dallas the last 18 years. And so that's home. This is home for me. But growing up in Brooklyn and growing up in a big Italian-Irish family was incredibly fortunate for me, Brittany, because, well, first of all, when you grow up in a big city and you love sports, you basically play baseball in the summer, football in the fall, basketball in the winter. And sometimes we played street hockey, without skates. But so I grew up in an environment where we were a lower middle class family. We didn't have a ton of money, and sports was my outlet. And it was really a 365-day-a-year thing for me personally. And it was a great education because you grew up in the streets in terms of playing sports. I grew up in a very, very multi-ethnic area. All my schooling was with kids of different cultures, backgrounds, races, etc. And you combine that with competing in sports as I did, and it just develops incredible life lessons. You mentioned I was the oldest of 7. I was really the white sheep of my family in that I was the only one that was really, really into sports. And I was the only one that went to college. My brothers and sisters are way smarter than me. My brothers are contractors. They can build a house from scratch. Foundation, electrical, sheetrock, paint, everything. And all I did was get a history degree, and I ended up coaching. So, but I think I became a coach because of my love of sports growing up in a big city like New York. And my mom and dad gave me that outlet to do it because they never bothered me about doing chores around the house because they knew I was at the park bouncing a basketball.
That's awesome. So you coached college basketball for 23 years.
Yep.
Ended up with a record of 175 and 100 as a head coach, which is pretty okay. I mean, that's pretty great.
Very lucky. I had good players. I did.
Well, so you know a thing or two about winning. What would you say is a common thread or necessity in a winning team?
I think a commitment to excellence, a commitment from everybody to excellence, not just the person who's in charge. In my case, it was the coach, but making sure that everybody understood they were part of success. And for me, it was my players, but it was also my staff. And so I had to create a standard of what excellence looked like. And a book I read many years ago called Seven Habits of Highly Successful People by an author by the name of Stephen Covey. He used to say, begin with the end in mind. And any good leader or coach has to know what the end result looks like. They have to know what success looks like. And I was lucky enough, I think, to have that in my head, especially as a young coach without head coaching experience. But I knew what the end result looked like, and I never relented from what I wanted my team to accomplish as far as what great looks like on a daily basis. And it's not just in the games, but it's really more importantly in practices when nobody's really watching. So I was, if I take any pride in anything, and I did have some successful teams. We went to the postseason almost every year I was a head coach. But the thing I took the biggest amount of pride in is when high school coaches would come to our practices and say to me, how do you get these guys to play so hard every day? Again, it was because I created a vision for my team of what success looked like. They understood how important practice was, and that leads to winning. And it's the same way in the business world. If you get people on board and give them a really good plan, and you tell them what success looks like in the business world, and you hold them accountable every day, they'll generally follow the plan, and you'll take them where they want to go as a leader.
That's great advice, especially for, we have a lot of business owners, business leaders, and
Yes, I know that.
we're going to talk a lot about teamwork on here.
Yes.
How do you coach the intangibles, things like toughness, discipline, sportsmanship?
Yeah. I think they're all, you got to make them important. You have to make, they have to understand that these are things that are important to you. Toughness is, to me, toughness is the definition of toughness to me is doing something the right way and doing it every single day. That takes toughness. It's not physical toughness. It may be even more mental. In some cases, it is physical toughness in practice, because there's days where kids are coming off. In my case, it was a young man who just had a fight with his girlfriend, or he had 3 exams that day and he had to go to a 2:00 practice. And toughness is putting everything out, clearing your head and saying, I'm going to be tough enough to go to practice today and give my teammates and my coaches 2 hours of hard work. So toughness is doing the right thing, but doing it every single day. That is a commitment. As far as sportsmanship, I love that you mentioned that, because I was always both a gracious winner and a gracious loser. I respected people who competed against me and my teams. I lost some very incredibly tough games as a head coach, and I won a lot of games, as you mentioned. And the one thing I wanted, I guess I'm trying to think of the right way to put it, but I wanted confident humility in my team. I wanted a confident humility. I wanted us to know we were good, but also be humble about our success. And when we lost, go down and shake their hand and wish those guys the best. In one year at Manhattan College, where it's really, I had some great teams. We were a 13 seed in the NCAA tournament, and we played Oklahoma in the NCAA tournament. They were a 4 seed. Some of the people who are on the call today know Kelvin Sampson. He's doing a great job at Houston now. And Kelvin became a really good friend after this game. But we played him in the NCAA tournament. And quite frankly, in the second half, we were just clearly the better team. Even as a 13 seed, we were up like 15 with about 5 minutes to go. And I told my kids on the bench, I don't want anybody celebrating. We knew we were going to win this game. We're supposed to win this game. So you shake their hand, and then you walk off the court to the locker room, and we'll celebrate in the locker room. I wanted them to have a confidence about themselves, but also be humble in success. And I think you can develop that. The kids have to know that's important to you, that we're going to do things the right way with sportsmanship. But when the game is over, that opponent is going to say, man, I don't even want to see those guys ever again the rest of the year. They just play so hard.
You talked a little bit about, coaching guys who were dealing with some tough stuff at the same time. So knowing our audience here, and they have employees who we're all going through a lot, but, even in normal times.
Yes.
How do you handle kind of that balance between coaching them into the toughness and dealing with life situations outside?
Yeah, I really believe, and I just tell my team this, you have to make adversity your friend. Like, adversity is part of anything we do in life. It's part of how to raise a family. It's part of coaching a team. It's part of running a business. I think we're all going through it, as you mentioned, Brittany. Right now, the last 6 months are, for those of us who've been around a while, unprecedented. Really, no one has ever thought that we would be in this. Just think back to everybody on the call. Think back to February 1st. And how life has changed so much, not only because of the pandemic, but because of what we're dealing with in terms of social justice in our country. And this is adversity at its peak, if you will. And I always talk to my teams about make it your friend. Like, you have to understand, to be great at anything or to accomplish anything, the road is going to be rocky. And the fun part is when you look back and say, man, we're better for having gone through the rocky times. That happens with teams all the time in sports, and it certainly happens in the business world, and it certainly happens in life and in families. And so I just think that when you embrace adversity as part of the journey and not expect things to always be smooth, because all of us on this call, I think that hits home to everybody handling adversity. I think the only way to deal with it is to embrace it and realize it's part of the journey, part of the struggle.
And speaking about the journey, we'll talk a little bit more about that. You were an assistant at 5 different programs before you
Yes.
became head coach. Which of those, and ranging in sizes, you coach
Yes.
at small schools, you coach at large schools. Which of those would you say was most instrumental in your development, and why?
Well, I think all of them, simply because when you work for people, when you are working for somebody in leadership, you're not only looking to them for counsel but you're also looking for role models, and you're looking for how the way they handle leadership would fit into my own style. And I've worked for some great basketball coaches. Gary Williams is in the Basketball Hall of Fame, who I worked for at Ohio State before he went to Maryland and won a national championship. And Rick Barnes is still going strong at Tennessee. I worked for Rick at Providence College when we were both young guys. And Danny Nee was another guy, former coach at Ohio University, and also had great success at Nebraska. And all three of those guys influenced me dramatically, Brittany. But I also, as I watched them, I said, well, certain things they do on a daily basis, that's not going to fit my leadership style. So there were certain things that I saw that I added into my potential leadership mix, because I knew I was working towards being a head coach. And there were other things I said, well, that doesn't fit my style. So I think when you're in a situation when you're not the leader, you can pay attention closely to figuring out, well, what is my leadership style going to be? If I'm the assistant manager at McDonald's in Frisco, what happens when I finally am in charge of my own McDonald's? How am I going to lead the 50 or so employees that work for me? And I think that if you're in a situation where you're going to become a leader at some point in your career, your philosophy has to evolve. And nobody wants to give somebody a leadership role who doesn't have a plan. So I always was formulating that plan in my head for the day that I became a head coach and had to lead 15 players and 5 or 6 staff members. So I learned a lot from all those guys, but I didn't learn to do it exactly like each of them. I created my own leadership style.
How would you say how do you find yourself as a leader? How did you create and figure out what was right for you and what wasn't?
Well, it's a great question. And for me, it started on the playgrounds of Brooklyn. Honestly, it started as a 14 or 15 or 16-year-old kid. And I always tell people I was usually the shortest kid in the neighborhood and sometimes the whitest kid in the neighborhood. If you play basketball like I did and you went to places like West 4th Street in Manhattan or Bedford-Stuyvesant or Crown Heights, where I grew up, my leadership style was on display even as a 15 or 16-year-old high school and schoolyard player, because they used to say about me, man, that kid is tough. He's gritty. Hey, take the little guy. He's a great passer, And so I learned how to be a really good teammate, seriously, on the playgrounds it's such an incredible education. You learn how to win. You learn how to lose. You learn how to fight sometimes, not always physically, but sometimes. You learn how to stand up for yourself. You learn how to be a great teammate. Where I grew up, if you lost a game on a Saturday morning, you didn't play for another hour because there were 20 people waiting to come on the court. So all of those things that I think back to now as a kid in Brooklyn all helped me with my leadership style. I was a coach on the floor at 15 years old and telling people where to go because I don't know, it just was something that I always had in me because I was very competitive. So I was competitive and I was smart about the game. So I wanted the other guys on my team to have the same type of competitiveness and intelligence. And it just came naturally for me to kind of tell people what to do. My wife doesn't like it now, but mostly at home I listen to her because that's the safest way to have a good marriage. But on a basketball court, it was something that came natural to me.
So when you left coaching to join ESPN, you were 34th winningest active coach in all of men's college basketball. That's incredible. So why the change?
I wanted to be a better dad and husband. I had 23 really good years. I thought I was taking a couple year halftime, and I had a chance to go to ESPN, and I said I'm going to move. We're going to move to Dallas, where my wife's family is from, because we'd already lived in New York, where I'm from. We lived in Ohio, New England, and New Mexico. And when I had a chance to go to ESPN, I said to the family, my boys were 9 and 6, hey, let's go to Dallas for a couple of years. I'll do some TV, and then I'll go back to coaching. And quite frankly, what happened was I started to really love television. I loved explaining the game on TV. I had a chance for at least half the season, or half the year, to spend that with my two sons, who Malcolm knows and are now in coaching, one in the NBA with the Orlando Magic and the other at Villanova University. And so it's become a family business. But quite frankly, I made a lifestyle decision that I wanted to watch my kids grow up. And so it meant giving up coaching. I thought it would be temporary, quite honestly. And as each year went by, I realized, as Jimmy Valvano used to say, the great coach, don't mess with happy. And so I had a great life. I love Dallas. We live in the summer in Colorado. I watched my kids grow up, and I said, nope, this is what makes me happy. And I miss coaching at times. I miss teaching. My friends like Tom Izzo and Bill Self are in the Hall of Fame. I'm not, certainly, but I honestly wouldn't trade a thing, because I've had an incredible second half of my career on the broadcasting side.
Now, your boys have grown up to be successful as well already. They're both very young, but both very successful. I saw one of them was named Big 12 Sports Person of the Year. He was nominated for that award, which is incredible. So not only a love of basketball, but how did you kind of instill some of those values in them?
Well, they were a great, that was a great laboratory for me. They were guinea pigs, quite honestly, because when I left coaching, I still wanted to coach, and they still loved playing. So I said, okay, I'm going to coach you guys, okay? And not in games, AAU games or things like that, but I became like their skill coach, and I learned a couple things. Never go more than an hour and 15 minutes, because then we would either have an argument and they get mad, or I would get mad at them. So I'm very fortunate that they both love the game. They both allowed me to coach them, and our friendship between father and son really grew because of the time we spent together that I gave to them, and not to other kids, other parents' kids, if I was coaching in college. So they got my time, and it, by osmosis, they fell in love with the game that I've loved for my whole life. And now they're both, both on their way to being successful. But in fact, one of them's visiting us right now here in Colorado, and James, our older guy, who played at Oklahoma and was a walk-on there, and so he really learned a lot. Both of those guys learned a lot of life lessons through sports, especially being great teammates and understanding that they were usually the shortest guy in their team, and they were both tough, hard-nosed kids. So they had to work hard. And those lessons, I think, are going to serve them well, not only as coaches, but also as parents and spouses and leaders someday. I'm very proud of both of them.
I think that's an important lesson. We forget a lot of times, the work-life balance, but
Yes.
the importance of spending time with your family. So you have a number of achievements, both as a coach and as a broadcaster. What has been a key to your individual success?
There's a woman who I read everything she writes. Her name is Angela Duckworth. She's a professor at Penn. She wrote a book called Grit just a couple of years ago, and she studies the term grit. It can be measured in her mind. And her definition of grit is passion plus perseverance equals grit. And she surmises, and I agree wholeheartedly, that grit is more important than innate intelligence. That people who are successful in life are probably more likely more full of grit than they are actual intelligence. And she's measured it with the U.S. Army and sports teams, et cetera. And I'm a total proponent of grit, because I have a passion for basketball that I've had my entire life. And perseverance is kind of in my DNA, because I don't give up on things. And so I think that's like the greatest life lesson someone could learn, is that intelligence is great. If you're the smartest guy in the room, that's cool. But I think grit is really more important to success in business or in coaching or in even as an individual than anything else. And I wholeheartedly recommend that book and also Carol Dweck's book called Mindset, which, her theory is some people have a fixed mindset. They learn everything by the time they're 25 and they don't think they can get any smarter. And most people who are successful have a growth mindset. And for me, honestly, I mean this sincerely to everybody listening, I learned something about basketball every single week of the year. And I've been around this game a long time, but every week I learned something from another coach or a player that I wish I knew 20 years ago. And anybody who's successful in business has to have a growth mindset. You have to constantly keep relearning your craft and adding new pieces of information to what makes you successful already. So 2 books I'd heartily recommend, but grit to me is what life's all about.
We'll make sure we send those out in the email that we send to everybody afterwards, because
Yep.
recommendations. Speaking of growth, during this pandemic, what's something that you've learned?
Well, I've studied basketball. I really have. I have a lot of good coaching friends in Europe. And I know I don't want to get too geeky here, technical about basketball, but the NBA right now, if we're watching the playoffs, what I've seen, and Malcolm knows this, in the last 20 years, I've become one of the basketball gurus, if you will, of international basketball because of the NBA draft and learning all the foreign kids. And I have a great deal of coaching friends overseas, and we taught them the game of basketball 50 years ago. Guys like UB Brown and Dr. Jack Ramsey and Chuck Daly, all these great NBA coaches. And now our European friends are teaching the game back to us. And so I've really studied international basketball the last 6 or 7 months, and we watch it every night in the playoffs because 1/4 of the NBA this year was born outside the United States. Luka Doncic didn't happen by accident. Kristaps Porzingis did not happen by accident. The Jokic and Serge Ibaka, these guys are all born outside the United States. That would have been unheard of 20 years ago. So what have I learned? I've learned that I can learn from others still, and that my European friends are teaching me basketball. The other cool thing that I'm doing, Brittany, is I've done a ton. I wish I bought, like everybody on the call, a stock in Zoom 6, 7, 8 months ago. But what I've done is I have done clinics for young coaches, and given myself, continued to be a mentor for young coaches. And one shout out to the guys down at Baylor, Jerome Tang and Alvin Brooks, who have started a group called Be Ready. It's a group that mostly young Black and Hispanic college coaches, men and women, and they meet every week on a Zoom call. And I have been on their calls 2 or 3 times now because I want to share what I know with young coaches, and particularly at a time where we're fighting for social justice and we're trying to open up opportunities for minority coaches to get ahead, quite frankly. In fact, I wouldn't even say get ahead, but I would say catch up. And so I've had a really enjoyable time, and not just with minority coaches, but with young coaches in general, of giving back my knowledge and sharing that with them during this time where we have so much free time and that where everybody's on their computers.
That's something Malcolm's been good at emphasizing to us, and I don't think we can emphasize enough, is that at the end of this, we want to make sure that we come out stronger, that we want to look back and see what we grew in, how we gave back to others. So it's great to hear you say that. That's awesome.
Well, we've all fought through adversity, as I said earlier, and when we do come out on the other side, and we can go to a restaurant without having to worry about anything, or take advantage of all the little things we took for granted, we're all going to be better for it.
Absolutely. So you were coach of the year. You took your teams to postseason play 8 of the 9 seasons, won tournament championships, won regular season championships. What would you say sticks out to you, if you can choose one, as your biggest accomplishment?
It didn't happen in a game. And this is a story I'm very proud of telling. In 1995, I probably had my best team. That was a team at Manhattan College. We were a Cinderella team, and we ended up beating Oklahoma in the tournament. And We got a couple bad calls at the end of the Arizona State game. Otherwise, we would have gone on to the Sweet 16 and lost a very heartbreaking game. But that season, and I told you how much I valued hard work and practice, right? Um, we had a situation late in February where we played on a Monday and we were off until Saturday. And so I gave the team off on Tuesday. And on Wednesday, I told my coaching staff, hey, we're going to go out to practice, but they need another day off because we were 22-2. We were rolling. And yet I felt like we needed to just catch our breath and rest their legs. So I was going to start practice on Wednesday, knowing we still had Thursday and Friday to get ready, and we were playing really well. And I told my coaches, get ready because I'm going to make up an excuse 5 minutes into practice and kick everybody out. And I want them to think that I'm unhappy, but I really want them to have another day off. So we start the Wednesday practice, and one of my guys threw a bad pass. And I was very theatrical, and Malcolm may remember this, but I had a pretty good level of intensity when I coached. I was kind of known for my intensity. And so I kicked the team out of practice after 5 minutes. And it was really an act. I just wanted them to have a day off. And I kind of used some words I can't use on the call. But it was basically, oh, you guys think you're better than you are. You're 22-2. You're too satisfied. This is what's going to get us beat. So I kick them out, and I go up to my office. And my assistant coaches thought I should have gotten an Academy Award for the performance. Well, one of my managers, my student managers who help at practice, came up to the office just a couple minutes later and said, Coach, they're still practicing. And I said, what do you mean they're practicing? He said, oh, no, they're practicing. They took our practice plan, and they're not leaving. So my assistant coaches said, should we go down there and coach? And I said, no, it's not our team anymore. It's their team. They took so much pride in the way we practiced. They thought they were letting me down and letting their teammates down. And that's what I call a self-coached team. And I think in any business that, and I know we have some people on the call that run businesses, when your employees can coach themselves and run your store or business without you, at least for a few days, it's the greatest sign that you've done your job that you could have. And they had so much pride. They thought that I was mad at them, but in reality, I was trying to give them a day off, but they wouldn't leave because they had so much pride in the way they practiced. And that to me was the greatest moment of my coaching career, because that meant that they believed everything I told them about what practice meant to us. And I think that's, a great lesson for any business. If your employees can't run the ship when you're gone for a few days, then you probably don't have the kind of business that you should have.
Absolutely. That's an incredible story. So you've seen a lot of success. You've seen losses like the rest of us.
Yeah.
What would you say is one lesson that you took from one of those?
Well, I used to say to my team, good or bad, let's start a 1-game winning streak. So, and I think you can apply that to business, your sale, last month's sales was record breaking. And how do you top that, And for me, it was never about topping what we did last month. Is how can we be the best today? And so we might have a 7-game winning streak, but I never talked about 7-game winning streaks. If we won a game, I'd say, okay, next game, let's start a 1-game winning streak. And then after we won that game, I'd say, okay, let's start a 1-game winning streak. And it was never about winning streaks and losing streaks per se. It was like, what can we do in the next practice and the next game to be better than we were yesterday or the last game? And so to me, it was more the process and not the outcome. And the process was what we did every day on a daily basis. And what we tried to do on a daily basis was just get better. And it didn't matter whether we had a record month of sales in the first quarter or last month. It was, what can we do today that we can do better than yesterday? And I think when you do that and you understand process over results, you end up getting the results you want anyway. But you can't get results without a great process. And to me, the process was going to practice every day and, doing the things that I felt were important for us to be successful.
We talk a lot about culture, both internal culture amongst your staff and external, customer facing.
Yes.
You've been part of a lot of different organizations. How would you say you can build a winning culture? And you also talked about setting a level of excellence. How do you get everybody to buy into that?
Well, it's a great question, and culture's an overused word nowadays. But and people throw it out there like, "Oh yeah, we got a great culture," or "We got to get a better culture." I'm a firm believer in culture, and I know that again, it's a cliche term everybody's using, but culture is basically culture is what you do every day. Culture is what people don't see on the surface. Like when you open up your store at 9 a.m. And people walk in, they don't understand how the culture's been built in your business or how it's been built in your team, but they ought to be able to recognize it as soon as they see it. There might not be a definition for it that I can give you, but when I used to say this, and I believe this, I really do. You should have been, you could have, anybody on this call could have walked into any 10 minutes of one of my practices, the beginning, middle, or end, and they should have known what I stand for and what my team stood for. And it's the same way. Like I travel a lot, Brittany, so I stay at a lot of hotels. I get on a lot of planes, and I'm around a lot of customer service, restaurants, etc. I can walk into a hotel or a restaurant and know within 10 minutes what their culture is and whether they have a good culture. I love great service, and I will tip when I get great service. And I do that because I remember working jobs when I was a kid, paper boy, working at restaurants, and tipping was really big. But to get back to culture, culture is something that gets developed over time. That you just know when you walk into a place that they have it either good or bad. And so when I'll just use when I show up at a restaurant, I know whether they have good culture or not. And it's because the managers, their employees have all bought into a level of excellence that has to be cultivated every single day. I'm trying to think of an example, but I'll just tell you this. Now, Outback, I've been to an Outback in Maui, and I've been to an Outback Steakhouse in Boston, and everywhere in between. And the food, you might not think it's Morton's or the best steak in the world, but the food and service is usually the same everywhere. Whereas if I go to a Chili's, and I hope we have no Chili's owners on here, but a Chili's franchises, it all depends on who the manager is. But I know the people at Outback have been trained really, really well because the food tastes the same in Maui as it does in Boston. The service is usually the same. But there's other places I go to, and I love their franchises where I don't know if I'm going to get a 9+ culture or a 3+ culture on a 10 scale. And so culture is something that you have to cultivate every single day, and everybody has to believe in the culture. And the people that don't believe in the culture, you can't have them around. If you have an employee that doesn't buy into the culture and you can't get through to them, then they're going to hurt your culture if you keep them around.
Absolutely. Well, I think we've got a couple of questions in the chat. Thank you again for being here.
Sure.
All of those. And so Malcolm's got a few questions coming in from our folks.
Coach, first of all, thanks so much for being on. Just one comment that came in from Shirley. I'm absolutely loving this session. So many parallels between sports and business, even if you're working for someone else. So appreciate that. A couple of questions that did come in, if you have a couple minutes.
Yes, I do.
The biggest lesson, obviously, these 2020, even before COVID, with Kobe Bryant's death and other stuff, it's been interesting.
Yeah.
What's the biggest lesson you personally have learned from this year that you're applying moving forward?
Oh yeah. That's a great question. I said it earlier, and I know, I got to figure out how to answer it. I want to be a better human being, Malcolm. Okay. I think the lesson of 2020 is to be a better human being. I grew up, as I told you earlier, in a multi-ethnic, multiracial culture. I would say 90% of the kids I coached in college happened to be black kids, mostly from inner cities. And I thought I understood what they were going through. And it's clear with some of my discussions with my black friends that I didn't get everything. Like, I don't worry about James and Matt on a Friday night when they were teenagers, when they borrowed the family car, you know, like some of my black friends have told me stories about their kids going out. Now, I happen to be a person who loves law enforcement and police and the Army and the military and patriotism, all that. But I also understand that we're not a perfect country, and we can do better. And we can do better, particularly with the people who've grown up that weren't as fortunate as I am. And so how do I do that? Well, part of it is my faith and what I believe is in my faith as a Christian. But I also believe on a daily basis, whether it's interacting with white people, black people, Hispanic people, tall people, smart people, short people, I can be a better human being. I can treat people better. I can treat people the way I'd want to be treated, which is the golden rule anyway, which is probably, to me, that transcends race, religion, etc. Because if we all treat each other honestly, fairly, equally, our society will be better. So I have learned that about myself, that I can be a better human being.
I completely agree. We got to keep getting better, and this country has to keep getting better.
Sure, absolutely.
And I hope I'm not speaking out of turn. This ties a little bit into another question. I believe you coached Ron Artest, and you talked about the kids from, in inner city.
Sure.
And so the question is, that came in, tell us something that you learned from a player, Ron Artest or another, and something that you feel like you were able to teach them.
Yeah. Well, Ron, who's now known as Meta World Peace, who I recruited to St. John's, who, if you follow sports or you follow the NBA, he had a long career, mostly good. And he had a couple of, he was a very intense, emotional young man, especially when I coached him. But it's funny. I always tell people, like, when they say, how did you coach Meta World Peace? I said, well, I was crazier than him. Back then, I say that jokingly because he was 6'7", about 245 when he was 17 years old, and he came to St. John's. He was literally 17 years old, hadn't turned 18 until midway through his freshman year. And I'm 5'7", if you haven't noticed, Malcolm, okay, which I know you know, but people on the call may not know. And I was not intimidated by his size, intensity, whatever. He needed to be coached, okay? It didn't matter how big I was. He needed to be coached. And probably one of the great compliments I've ever gotten was someone was asking him just recently, the last couple of years, hey, what'd you think of Phil Jackson? Oh, man, great coach, man, great coach, great coach. What about Coach Fran at St. John's? The coach. And so I had an impact on him. And what I learned was, and I mean this, great players want to be coached. They want to be coached. You can't be afraid of them. You can't be afraid to coach them. You can't be afraid to coach LeBron. You could have a high earner in your business. You can't be afraid to push them even more, to be even better than they already are. So that's what I learned from him, is that, and I had other great players that I always felt that you had to coach your best player the hardest, because if everybody else on the team said, wow, can you believe he just yelled at Ron Artest? He just, told Ron Artest he was going to kick his ass out of the gym if he didn't go harder. Excuse my language. But that's kind of how I approached coaching, was if I could get the best player on my team to buy into my coaching, then everybody else would understand there's no favorites here. So I learned, that's probably the thing I learned. And then the other thing I wish I'd have done a little bit better job of, honestly, as much as I was close to my players, was getting to know what made them tick. And I'll say this to anybody out there who either coaches young people or is dealing with young people in business: mental health is the new frontier in our society. I'm just telling everybody, you have to understand that it's a very fragile society right now. And not just because of what we went through this last 6 months, but young people are more fragile than ever. They're more insecure. Social media is both good and bad. But I wish, and I tell my sons this, I tell young coaches this: learn about mental health, because in coaching, that's the next frontier. It's as important as X and O's or whatever else goes into being a successful coach.
I would argue it's more important.
I'd say so.
On a lighter note, someone asked here, they're from New York, new to Dallas.
Yeah.
Where should they go to get good pizza?
Oh, well, it's no question. Mimi's on Mimi's on Northwest Highway and Hillcrest. And a funny story, in my neighborhood, one of my neighbors said, hey, you need to try this is like 7 years ago. You need to try that new place, Mimi's. It's Brooklyn style. And I was like, yeah, right. I've heard that 10,000 times, Brooklyn style pizza. I walk in and the guy said, hey, can I help you? I said, you from Brooklyn? He goes, yeah. I said, where'd you learn how to make pizza? He said, Trio. I said, on 19th Street and Avenue U? He goes, yeah. Anyway, that's the pizza I grew up with. And it's a small little place next to El Phoenix, Northwest Highway, little shopping center there. Great pizza. I see I Fratelli, someone popping up there. Joella. Pretty good. I'm a Campese's guy. My wife doesn't like Campese's, but authentic Brooklyn style. And then there's a place on Midway, just north of 635. That's really good too. It's over by where those furniture shops are.
Okay. Last question. You got the Palestra there in the background.
Yeah.
Why the Palestra, and name 2 other college basketball venues that really resonate with you?
Well, there's got to be a Kansas grad on here somewhere, I'm sure. But Allen Fieldhouse is special to me. Doesn't rain, snow, sleet, whatever. It's going to be 16,300 every night. They come from every corner of Kansas. So Kansas Jayhawks have a great history. I love doing games there. They're supposed to win every game, so they get mad when I actually have to cover 9 other teams in the Big 12. They get mad at me, but I love Allen Fieldhouse. The Palestra, where I'm sitting here today, is the home of the University of Pennsylvania. It's the 3rd oldest arena in college basketball. It's like a mini Allen Fieldhouse, Malcolm, as you probably know. And it's not only the home of Penn, but in the old day, and they still play the Big Five. The Big Five is Philly's tradition of Villanova, Temple, St. Joe's, Penn, and LaSalle. And they used to have triple headers in this place that I went to as a college kid. I took the Amtrak train down to Philly. I had to see it. And I love this place. So that would be another favorite of mine. And also, when they're good, Iowa State, Hilton Coliseum. First of all, the people of Iowa, nice is in their DNA. And it's just an incredible arena. I love going up there. People are great. And those are probably 3 of my favorites right off the top of my head.
Fantastic. Coach, all your stories remind me of a story someone told me, that there are 3 gears to a team and to a business. And just like on a bike, they're the big gears, right? There could be little ones in between, but that first gear is I, and getting yourself in the right mindset and being committed to it. But that doesn't get you going that fast. And the second gear is we, and that's where you're getting your staff, your assistant coaches, they're in line, right? They have the same vision you do. But that gear where it gets you really going is the 3rd gear, and that's where it's all. And you talk about a self-coached team. It's when everybody involved in your program, everybody involved in your business, if it's a college basketball team, it's all the way to the administrators, the boosters, the fans. It's when everyone's pulling in that same direction. And that's certainly what we strive to be here with the Legends, with our partners. And, your comments about getting better as a nation, it seems to me that's kind of what we need to do as a nation as well, is embrace that we all need to do better and be pulling in that same direction. So
I agree. And I would say finally that sports is an incredible metaphor for life in general. The highs, the lows, the teamwork, success, winning and losing. And what we're going through right now is something that's going to make us better, tougher, stronger on the other side. I would think of, and some of us are still blessed in our lives, there's no question. But as a nation right now, we're going through like maybe a 3-game losing streak. You know what I mean?
Sure.
With the pandemic and fighting for social justice and the other things going on. And so, but we have a championship team. I've been to 43 countries. This is still, I with all our problems, to me, it's still the greatest country in the world. It's not perfect by any stretch, but we're a championship team who, hit some hard times, some injuries, a couple tough losses. And I think we'll come out on the other side better. And we see it every year in sports.
We're going to get on a 1-game winning streak every day.
That's exactly right.
We'll be all right. Well,
All
Coach,
right.
appreciate you taking the time. Enjoy Colorado. Folks, I know Coach Fraschilla needs to go, But if you want to stay on and do some more networking, we are ready to go. Coach Fraschilla, thank you very much.
Thanks, Malcolm. Thanks, everybody on the call. Brittany, thank you. Great job.
Thanks, Coach.
Thank
Okay.
you.